a large part of the conspiracy, truther, and overall information community focuses a lot of their attention and energy on the idea of corruption. And like I mentioned in previous videos, this perspective is ultimately counterproductive when realizing that the corruption is built into the system. Focusing on the corruption is akin to focusing on the individual politicians instead of the toxicity of the system itself. Knowing that the system is designed to account for and profit from this corruption. This is the most complex form of distraction and controlled opposition. Just as on another version of reality, the political scene, red versus blue, whatever you want to call it, is also a complex form of distraction. But once you break free from that limited perspective of how deep this system is ingrained into our everyday interactions, just as you move from the political perspective of things into realizing the undertones, the foundations of these political moves that add up to bigger things, going into conspiracies, going into false flags, going into the nuts and bolts of how these systems work. The next intellectual trap is to glorify, debate, attack, and even expand upon this idea of corruption. I fell into this trap myself. I think really it's a part of the process of unveiling a lot of this information. It's a part of breaking through the layers of oneself and the system and how they mirror each other. And what allows these systems to hold on to people, or people to hold on to these systems, wherever perspective they're coming from, is their belief in these systems, is their trust in the way these systems interact in their everyday reality. So like I said, a lot of people who are in the middle of the road, the masses of people who are in the middle, holding themselves above the people on the bottom, trying to get to the top, while the people on the top are holding themselves above the people in the middle and the bottom, trying to get even higher or be the top of the top. It's the creature comforts and the fear of being ostracized from these groups, separated on their own, broken from that codependent connection, the fear of losing what it is that this system has given them, that they have told them they worked for, the fear of having to reset themselves, the fear of having their egos attacked, the fear of having to go back on what they stood so firmly on before, the fear of being wrong. So many people in certain circles have been attacked, censored, deleted, canceled for speaking out against these systems for so long. And the masses of people who are stuck in these groups are afraid of that happening to them. This is why they sacrifice people publicly on social media making it easier now to cancel people. This is a public lynching. Back in the day, they used to publicly lynch people or publicly torture people. It's the same thing. Psychological torture, forcing people to kill themselves, forcing people to silence themselves, forcing people to go against their common sense. If you were to ask somebody, there's a so-called healthcare system out there that is refusing healthcare to people because they haven't conformed to the government injecting something into their body. Once you ask them the question of, is that still a healthcare system, or is that a tentacle from the government? People being so locked into that cognitive dissonance, pretty much short-circuiting and having to attack you with ad hominem attacks or change the subject, whatever it is that they have to do to make them comfortable in avoiding the question, to deflect from the points being made. This is the basic definition of zombification. It's a psychological and intellectual zombification. These systems have to attack you on every angle, from the physical to the psychological to the spiritual. And within every one of those systems, there are microsystems that exist much closer to home in personal lives. So the initial hit is on the large scale. And these hits are first tested on military subjects. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day about how what society is going through right now, I went through personally, and I've shared this on this channel before. I went through this personally back in 2009 and 2010, right before I got out of the Army. I was stationed in Hawaii, and I was, if not the last, one of the last people to get out of the red in reference to the H1N1 vaccine. I never took the shot, but for the last year of my enlistment, I was attacked by my chain of command, and even outside of the chain of command, inside of the medical part of the chain of command, being shamed and guilted and forced by my chain of command to do something that I was adamantly against because of research, not because of I was being just a hardhead or because I'm undisciplined. This is what they attack you with. Like Howard Stern calling Kyrie Irving just the dumbest person there is right now, because he refuses millions of dollars just because he won't get the vaccine. You can tell what these people's values are. How people like Howard Stern, Trevor Noah, John Oliver, all your local newscasters and mainstream newscasters, actors, they are the front men of this zombified psyche. But yeah, I was fighting, refusing that H1N1 vaccine because I was being forced to do something that instinctually, intuitively, I felt a certain way about it. Not to mention the fact that my body was only the property of the military for another year, whereas I had to live the rest of my life in my body. It's my property once I get out of the military. I have my whole life ahead of me. They only owned me for a year. So unless they were going to pin me down and stick that needle in my arm, it wasn't going to happen. But not only that, I was a staff sergeant at the time, which means I had a squad of soldiers that were under my supervision. And when you have that, you also have the responsibility of, in so many ways, forcing them to do what their chain of command, my chain of command, our chain of command has told them to do. Otherwise, they will get in trouble. They could get kicked out. They could get docked pay, whatever it is. You will be attacked in some kind of way. And one of the main things in the NCO creed, non-commissioned officers creed, was to maintain the health and the welfare of your soldiers. These were some of the values that you had to go by, that you had to then teach your soldiers to be about. So in order to do that, I had to share with them the same information that I researched for myself. And if they were going to take that shot for themselves, then that's their own decision. But I had to provide them with the information based upon what I researched and tell them why I was refusing this vaccine at that time, and also why I would suggest to them that they do not force their children or even their loved ones to take this vaccine. That was my main focus at that time, because a lot of the soldiers, you have soldiers getting in there having children at 18, 19 years old, already married with multiple kids. Their loved ones, their kids are seen as extensions of these soldiers. And by that I mean, if your soldier is a property of the military, then their families are in so many ways property of the military. So whereas they could force a soldier to do whatever it is that they tell them, they can't really force their families to do it, but they can heavily suggest that they do this, because just like in the civilian life, everything is for your benefit. Take advantage of it, because people in other countries don't have the advantages that we have here. So they play on the heartstrings of the families of these soldiers and can basically double down on their test subjects, soldiers, by now testing on their family members, their children. Because all the family members and the children of the soldiers have medical records that go through the military hospitals, the military healthcare system. This is another reason why they, in so many ways, force soldiers to get married or have children, put them in these situations, because not only because of retention rates, because like I said before, they in so many ways force these soldiers, because they're young and dumb, they don't know, guilt and shame them. Oh, you don't have a girlfriend, you're not married yet, you don't have any kids. It's that whole machismo space. On a personal side, that's how they guilt and shame you into doing it. But on a financial side, they pay you more. You get separation pay, you get extra pay for your children, you get extra pay when you're married, you get to move out of the barracks, which is the biggest thing. You're living in these shitty ass barracks rooms. You just have a room with a shared bathroom. You have to clean that bathroom, clean those hallways, clean up after other people's shit. You don't want to live there anymore. So what happens? People get married. Sometimes just because. And the military knows this. So they'll marry, one of their friends just to get out of the barracks and get that extra pay and be able to live. They'll get paid extra to live off post if they're married, if they have children. They'll get paid extra. They get deployed and they get separation pay from their family. The military does this because they know once you have that responsibility of having to provide for your family, for your children, for your husband or wife, there's more of a chance that you're going to stay in the military. So this is a retention tactic. Recruiters do this just as well. For people who have family, who have children, they tell them about the extra pay. They tell them about the perks that come along with being a family man and joining the military. Like I said, the military doesn't only do that. They don't only force you in so many ways to have children and get married just for retention. Like I've shared in other videos before, the military is just an extension of the government. The government uses the masses of people as science projects, civilians as science projects, in order to maintain in the civilian life. Codependency is retention. Codependency on the system overall. Like drug addicts, future customers. This is why the system is so heavily based on addiction in so many forms. Everything surrounding addiction is mainstream. Wake up in the morning, coffee, drugs, food, pornography, money, status, distraction, social media, anything to steal your time and keep you from questioning the overall system. So yeah, back in 2008, 1 year into the second part of my military career, that's when I started to question a lot of the systems that are going on, both in the military and outside of the military. All these wars, false flags, that was the main thing, starting to ask questions about 9/11. And I was in the first time during 9/11. I got out, still oblivious to what was going on, had no support group to explain to me what I was a part of. It was still only focusing on, providing. What are you going to do? You're going to go to school? You're going to get a job? You're going to do this? Surrounded by people just as lost as I was. And it took me having to go back into the military a second time, get knocked over the head a second time, in order to realize and start asking questions on a deeper level. So in 2008, 1 year after I had got back in, that's when I started to unveil a lot of these storylines. And between 2008 and 2009, that's when I started to stand my ground. And when I hit 2009, I was getting out in 2010 because it was just a 3-year contract. that's when I started to focus more on the future and my body and question a lot of these mandates at that time that were being forced upon me. When 9/11 hit, they were sending us to the gym in squads of people being sent to the gym to get stuck with sometimes 10 shots at a time. 10 shots at a time. SARS, anthrax, whatever crazy shit that they were pumping on the mainstream media, they had a shot for it. And everybody was getting deployed, and even if you weren't getting deployed, you were going to get that shot because you could get deployed. 10 shots at a time. What the hell are they doing to these soldiers? I can't imagine what they're doing now. But like I said, the soldiers were the test subjects, and the family members were collateral damage. They were also test subjects. So with my squad, they knew I was always the loud one. I was always the one who was going to speak my mind. So I refused a shot. I told my soldiers why and why they shouldn't force their children to do that. And then it was up to them if they were going to do it or not. Luckily, not all of them did it. But I held my ground when they had me locked up in front of the first sergeant getting yelled at and basically in my office in front of the whole company about why I wouldn't take the shot. I'm refusing orders and all this shit. Basically just sitting there looking him dead in his eyes saying, "Are you done?" In so many ways, of course, I'm not saying anything, but my face says it all. Are you done? I have work to do. I'm still not going to take this shot. Make me an appointment to go get yelled at by the next higher ranking officer, or let me get back to work. One of the two things. So there I was getting yelled at on up the line pretty much once a week by the next person in the chain of command because I wouldn't take that shot. And each time I told them, here's my reasons why. This is my research. This is what I've come about. This is the information I've come up on. I'm only the property of the military for the next year. I'm responsible for my body for the rest of my life. And if you wanted me to go even further into why I'm also telling my soldiers not to do this to their families, it's written right in your own creed, because I'm responsible for the health and the welfare of these soldiers. And if that's the case, I'm also responsible for the health and the welfare of their families. So if you want me to force these soldiers to do something that could possibly injure them and their family members, then you are asking me to go against the very creed that I stand for. There's nothing else they could say after that. It's basically, have a nice day. So back then, when I was in the military, the grip they had on me was the possibility of getting kicked out, losing pay, being demoted, whatever it was. But in civilian life, you're getting to the same circumstances now. People are being forced into these situations because they will lose their jobs. They will lose their pay. They'll get demoted in society for being an outcast. And their future is in jeopardy. Their retirement is in jeopardy. And since people are so dumbed down, see, in the military, you get broken down. Your spirit gets broken. This is why they cut your hair. They turn you into a number. You have no personal identifiers anymore. You are just part of the bigger picture. Do what you're told as a robot, as a number, as a zombie. You have no rights. You have no freedoms. This is what's happening in civilian life these days. And as these systems break down, you need people, the chain of command, to enforce these rules upon you. So in the civilian chain of command, you have what? Politicians, teachers, police officers, celebrities, athletes, newscasters, comedians, elders in your family who believe completely in this system, peer groups, co-workers, supervisors, managers. All these people are in the societal chain of command. influencers, they all force you to act a certain way. Back in the day, they didn't have a very strong group. They didn't have a strong enough group to influence everybody. Everybody meaning different age groups, different cultures, different demographics, because it was heavily focused on certain groups like business people, the middle class. Nowadays, with social media, the internet, they have various ways to attack, influence, and focus their attacks on pretty much every group of people out there, every demographic. And how I'm seeing it, the last move that needed to be made was the activating of the grips of social media on the younger generations. Because it was the younger generations that weren't heavily influenced by the groups, the higher chain of command. It was only the middle class, blue collar, white collar, the workers, the providers, the parents, the elders. Those are the only people who paid attention to the news and politics and so on and so forth. So just as much as children these days are focusing on shit that they don't need to be focusing on, stuff that's going to rot them internally, their foundations, they're also in so many ways growing up quicker, making decisions quicker. And these influencers are a big part of this. So now you have more people following along with these systems because these children, the majority of the masses, are now going to follow the select few influencers that are out there on social media, their celebrities, their teachers, whatever it is, politicians. And since you have such a great divide in the older groups of people, that existing also separates the children from the older groups. So now the children are going to force themselves to grow up quicker because they're going to have to think for themselves. And where are they going to go to think for themselves? They're going to go to their social media influencers. The same way that middle-aged people or their so-called elders go to politicians or celebrities or the news. Basically, social media or influencers are the news of the younger generation. So you have the older generation locked down by politics, the middle-aged adults locked down by celebrities, Hollywood, and also politics. And you have the younger generations locked down by social media, Hollywood, and these influencers. So this is why these mass movements could be made right now and are being made right now. Because they have every demographic of being locked into their own personal mind control representative. Social media and the internet was the last puzzle piece needed to hook the younger generation, the generation that wasn't completely buying into the beliefs of the system. And the younger generation is the most important one because they're the ones that are going to fight in the future and the present moment. The proof of this can be observed with relationships between parents and the younger generation, the divide that's happening there. You have parents who are separating themselves from the belief systems, the mandates of these systems, who are accepted for the most part and glorified by Hollywood, the mainstream media, politics, the government, education systems. It's basically the parents versus that whole group of people. And if the parents are still being forced to send their children to school, who do you think the children are going to side with? Subconsciously, they're thinking that their parents know that the government is still right in every decision that they make because they're forcing their children to go to school. So it doesn't matter what they believe about the vaccine or whatever it is, they're going to lean towards the conformity of the system when held up against even their own parents. They knew having just the athletes, the actors, the politicians, and doctors, it wasn't going to be enough. It had to be personal. In order to relate to the younger generation, it had to be personal. In order to create that divide between the parents and the children, you had to basically create a relationship with these children that would in so many ways overtake their relationship with their parents in order to create that separation, in order to put stronger grips on their belief systems. Because you have these children who are constantly inundated with social media all day, every day, putting technology in the hands of these kids when they go to school. Social media in the hands of these children when they go to school. They all have phones, they have tablets in their schools. Just like back in the day, people used to say the celebrities, the Hollywood, the actors, the musicians were the ones raising the kids, not the parents anymore. Well, today it's the social media influencers. And it's more personal because they can pick who they most relate to. Where back in the day, they could pick between who they most relate to with who's available, but so many people are available nowadays. All these social media influencers, you basically have every angle covered for every individual, every child out there to relate to somebody, relate to something. And once they do that, that relating to them will break the connection with their own parents. And since so many parents themselves don't even have any strong foundations or convictions in their own reality, the children know they're not going to follow them. They're not going to have anything to hold on to. So they're going to default to what is accepted on a mass scale. They're going to default to not being embarrassed. They're going to default to the group think. Because children, young adults, adolescents, they're so fragile. They have such a fragile ego. They need a strong foundation. And when you have the foundation of these social media influencers backed by the government, backed by money, millions and millions of dollars, millions and millions of subscribers, which is another version of money in the eyes of the people, you're outgunned in every way as a parent. So you have children who are looking down on the parents now because the parents are refusing the vaccine, and the children wanting to get the vaccine. One, because they want to be a part of Hollywood, the group of people who are right, the group of people who are cool and hip, the social media influencers, the athletes, the superheroes of these children. This is the most complex form of distraction and controlled opposition, the most complex form of manipulation. And you as a parent, or you as a concerned family member, can have all the information in the world. You can have all the evidence in the world of the corruption of this system. It won't matter. Because these children, these friends, family members, are not only attacked every day, every moment of the day with information that contradicts what you're saying, but their own programming is now flipped to work against themselves. There's a critical mass that happens internally with these individuals once they are overloaded with peer groups and shame and guilt and fear. The only way that anything can break through is if they start to question themselves. And that takes a strong individual to be able to do that. It's very rare to have an adolescent, a child, a young adult to have that strength. Like I said, I actually went into the military right after high school. Can't blame me for that. But even when I got out of the military, I still was unaware of what was going on and went back into the military. It took me a second time to go into the depths, the deepest, darkest depths of this destructive ass system for me to finally realize and get hit with this shit and realize, holy shit, this is what all this is connected to. So like I said, it's about getting them as young as possible. Because if you get them locked into a situation as young as possible, the younger they are, the more likely it is that they'll get into a situation, they'll put themselves in a situation that will make them have to be more codependent on this system. So the children are being hit with social media as early as possible. So it psychologically forces them to follow their superheroes on the internet. against the better judgment of their own parents. And like I said, you can have all the evidence in the world about the corruption of this system. This system selling sickness and disease, promoting the sickness and disease because it pushes the addiction. This addiction pushes codependency. So they will have their doctors recommending cigarettes to expectant mothers. They'll put cigarettes in the food rations for the military, promoting sickness and disease, addiction, fetal complications for these pregnant women. Pushed by the doctors. They'll put asbestos in the insulation in the buildings, in the buildings that you actually live in. Cancer-causing asbestos. They'll put heroin in cough syrups. They'll put DDTs in pesticides. All backed by the CDC, the same CDC that's pushing these mandated vaccines. They'll spray Agent Orange on soldiers. And even when they try to fight to get their disability from these chemicals being sprayed on them, they will even give them shit for the rest of their lives. Make it as difficult as possible for them to even be compensated because of these so-called mistakes. They'll put cocaine in soda, in Coca-Cola. And today, all the sugars, all the high fructose corn syrup, all the genetically modified foods, we don't know how this is going to affect us in the future. It's the same thing. They're just going to play the oops card again. Oops, we didn't know. Oops, my ass. Your CDC knew. Then after all that information, like I said, these influencers have all the power. Your kids are not listening to you. They think you're crazy. And like I said in previous videos, the so-called Trump movement, the attaching him to the conspiracy theory movement, the QAnon movement, was a way to control the opposition, to make it look crazy, to make challenging the system crazy, to make the people who promote the system, your athletes, your celebrities, your politicians, your newscasters, they needed the extreme measures of these idiotic people that they televise in order to beat down by their comedians on TV, their late night talk show hosts. They needed the stupidity of these people in order to make the stupidity of their mainstream promoters of this system, to make them look normal, to make them look credible. That's how ridiculous and sick this system is. It couldn't do it on its own. They couldn't sell this information on their own. They had to have a group of individuals who were so beyond sick in order to break down, beat down the information overall. Because this group of individuals are attached to any conspiracy theory, that's a way of beating down and covering up all conspiracy theories. All systems that go against the mainstream systems. Because after you present all of that information that I said was pushed by the government, approved by the CDC, after you present all that information, all the documentation on the corruption of these systems, to have somebody like Michael Jordan stand up on social media and say, "Oh, I trust science." This shit is sick. It's ridiculous. But like I said in the last video, you can't have any attachments to it. People are going to do whatever it is they're going to do in their own way, in their own time. They have to get through it on their own. The only thing it can do is present information and let it go. The less attachment that you have to it, the easier it'll be for them to take it and run with it on their own. If they got your attachments to it, your grips, your weight on it, it's going to be harder for them to pick up. They're not going to want to do it. People are lazy. So the upside is, now you can see who's working together. Out of all this, if there is an upside, you can see now the medical industry, big pharma, big tech, the government, education systems, colleges, universities, corporations, the mainstream media, professional sports, Hollywood. local news, actors, social media influencers, they're all working together. It's easier to identify who's who now on every angle, pretty much. Because, like I said, now you can have the fake truthers, fake conspiracy theorists. It's also easier to identify them, too. It's a lot of people hiding in those conspiracy circles, those truther circles, just under the protection of not being a part of the mainstream circle. But it's more than that. It's more than just not being a part of the mind control system. You have to do some work there. And the people who don't want to do the work, they're in the conspiracy circles, they're the ones who jumped on the team of these QAnon and Trump groups and Alex Jones circles and the TYT circles. They're the ones who jumped in those circles as if that's it, as if that's the end. But like I said, those are the groups that are trying to protect this system. They still think this system is designed for their benefit. They only want to share information up to a certain degree. Like I said, they're actually the most dangerous. The individuals who are talking about the corruption instead of shining a light on the fact that this system is based upon making a profit, accounting for this corruption. They knew it was designed to be corrupt. So if you're just talking about the corruption, you might as well just be talking about Democrats and Republicans. It's empty. It's meaningless. If the system was designed to be corrupt, you're just basically spinning wheels. So like I said in closing, the system had to be more relatable to the younger generation. Social media made that possible. Now that they have the younger generation, the middle generation, and the older generation locked down with their various versions of mind control, they can sell whatever they want. And the future generations, the younger generation, the most vulnerable generation, are going to have a more difficult time of getting out of those systems because now the people that are close to them are now separated in so many different ways. Because once they just unplug, once they pull the system, once they pull the rug out of these social media influencers, celebrities, actors, athletes, where are your kids going to go? What are they going to do? They're going to be lost. So like I said, there is an upside. Focus on the upside. The upside of being able to now see these groups, see these individuals for who and what they are, what they stand for. There have been people in our circles who have been breaking down what these people have stood for years now. But now it's starting to be seen on a larger scale. And the best thing I think we could do is share information on how this corruption is built into the infrastructure. Because if you spend most of your time just holding yourself above everybody else in those slums of intellect by, debating and talking about expanding upon the corruption, you're just as bad as the garbage ass celebrities out there that are pushing this system. Just another form of distraction. But to each his own. Will there be a critical mass on the other side? You're already seeing the critical mass of zombification. Will there be a critical mass of anti-zombification? We'll see.